From Steven Jackson firing his gun during a heated confrontation outside a strip club.
I actually shot a gun at somebody while I was in the NBA.
To Ja Morant pulling a gun on his Opps. This video breaks down NBA players who went way too far by pulling the trigger on IG Live. Ja Morant. Let's start with the most recent and perhaps most talked about case in NBA history. Ja Morant's multiple gun flashing incidents on Instagram Live that dominated headlines throughout 2023. The first incident occurred on March 4, 2023 at Shotgun Willie's, a nightclub in Glendale, Colorado, after the Grizzlies had just suffered a disappointing loss to the Denver Nuggets. Picture this, it's around 3 a.m. Emotions are running high after the loss, and Morant decides to go live on Instagram from inside the club. What happened next shocked the basketball world and sent ripples throughout the entire sports industry. Morant appeared shirtless, holding what looked like a handgun while dancing and singing along to music, briefly flashing the gun toward the camera before switching to his phone's front-facing view. The video went viral on platforms like X, formerly Twitter, with users sharing clips and debating its implications. The Grizzlies initially held Morant out of games for personal reasons, and the NBA launched a comprehensive investigation. Glendale police investigated but found no criminal wrongdoing, as no threats were made, and the gun's legality wasn't disputed under Colorado's open carry laws. But the damage to Morant's reputation and bank account was already done. Morant was suspended for 8 games without pay by the NBA for conduct detrimental to the league, costing him approximately $668,000 in salary based on his $12.6 million contract at the time. He issued a public apology stating he would take some time away to get help and focus on better decision making, even checking into a counseling program in Florida for stress management. For a moment, it seemed like Morant understood the gravity of his mistake and was committed to making positive changes in his life. On May 14, 2023, just 2 months after his first suspension and public apology, Morant appeared in another Instagram Live video, this time streamed by his friend, Devontae Pack. The clip showed Morant in the passenger seat of a car, listening to NBA YoungBoy's tracks, and briefly flashing what appeared to be a handgun before his friend quickly angled the camera away. This happened shortly after the Grizzlies' playoff elimination by the Los Angeles Lakers, adding insult to injury for Memphis fans. The Grizzlies suspended Morant from all team activities pending NBA review, essentially cutting ties with their star player until the league decided his fate. On June 16, 2023, the NBA issued a devastating 25-game suspension without pay for the start of the 2023-24 season, costing Morant approximately $7.6 million in lost salary from his $33.5 million contract extension. But the story doesn't end there. Even after serving his suspension and returning to the court, Morant continued to make headlines for all the wrong reasons. On April 4, 2025, the NBA fined Morant $75,000 fine for continued finger gun gestures despite prior warnings, following games where he pointed finger guns at opponents or the crowd. The league deemed these gestures inappropriate given his history, though Morant defended them as harmless fun. The fine sparked debates on consistency, as other players like Dalton Knecht have used similar gestures without penalty, raising questions about whether Morant was being specifically targeted. If Morant's saga was about self-inflicted wounds in the spotlight, Appling's story shows what happens when the violence moves from social media into real life, and tragically, even into his own family. Keith Appling. Keith Appling's basketball credentials were impressive and suggested a bright future ahead. He was a standout guard at Michigan State from 2010 to 2014, leading the team in scoring and assists during his senior year. He briefly played in the NBA for the Orlando Magic in 2016, representing the culmination of years of hard work and dedication to the sport. But behind the success on the court, Appling was struggling with demons that would eventually consume his life and destroy the lives of others. On May 22, 2021, around 7:10 p.m. on Whitcomb Street in Detroit, Appling was involved in a fatal shooting that would forever change multiple families. The victim was 66-year-old Clyde Edmonds, who was actually a relative of Appling. Specifically, Edmonds' wife was Appling's mother's first cousin. This wasn't a random act of violence or a street confrontation with strangers. This was family turning against family in the most devastating and unthinkable way possible. What started as a family argument over a personal dispute involving a handgun escalated into unthinkable violence when Appling shot Edmonds multiple times during the altercation. According to prosecutors, the altercation began as a family dispute over a handgun, with Appling firing several shots that struck Edmonds multiple times in the chest and back. Witnesses reported hearing gunshots and seeing Appling flee in a vehicle, leaving his dying relative behind. Edmonds was found suffering from multiple gunshot wounds and was pronounced dead at a local hospital, while Appling fled the scene but was located and arrested by Detroit police later that evening. On June 7, 2021, Appling was formally charged with first-degree murder, assault with intent to murder, and felony firearm possession. He was denied bond and remained in jail pending trial, while his girlfriend, Natalie Bannister, was also charged as an accessory after the fact for allegedly helping him evade capture. On February 13, 2023, Appling pleaded guilty to reduced charges of second-degree murder and felony firearm in Wayne County Circuit Court. The plea agreement stipulated a sentence of 18 to 40 years for the murder charge, plus a mandatory 2-year consecutive term for the firearm offense. Prosecutors noted that the plea avoided a potential life sentence if convicted of first-degree murder. On March 3, 2023, Wayne County Circuit Court Judge Regina Thomas sentenced Appling in line with the plea deal: 40 years for second-degree murder and 2 years for the firearm charge. During the sentencing hearing, Appling expressed remorse, apologizing to Edmonds' family, though one has to wonder if those apologies provided any real comfort to people grieving the senseless loss of their loved one. If you think Appling's story is tragic, wait until you hear about Javaris Crittenton, whose fall from NBA prospect to convicted killer is so shocking and heartbreaking that it was recently featured in Netflix's Untold Shooting Guards documentary, and for good reason. Javaris Crittenton. The incident that would define Crittenton's legacy and destroy multiple lives occurred on August 19, 2011, around 10:30 p.m. at 2911 Macon Drive in southeast Atlanta, in what prosecutors described as a revenge killing stemming from a robbery Crittenton had experienced months earlier. In April 2011, Crittenton was robbed at gunpoint in Atlanta, losing jewelry and other valuables, and he believed Trontavious Stevens, a rival gang member, was involved. Rather than report the robbery to police or handle it through legal channels, Crittenton began investigating on his own, frequenting areas like 50 Mount Zion Road where Stevens was known to be. On August 14, 2011, shots were fired from a similar black SUV at 50 Mount Zion Road, targeting Stevens or associates, with prosecutors later tying this to Crittenton as part of his revenge efforts. 5 days later, Crittenton's quest for revenge reached its deadly climax. Crittenton and his cousin Douglas Gamble drove up in a rented black Chevrolet Tahoe SUV, with Crittenton in the back seat firing at least 3 shots from an automatic rifle, an AK-47 style weapon, at a group walking outside. The intended target was Trontavious Stevens, who was in the group and survived the shooting. Instead of hitting his intended target, the bullet struck 22-year-old Julian Chair Jones, nicknamed Peep-Eye, an innocent bystander and mother of 4 young children, ages newborn to 8, multiple times in the leg. A witness called 911 immediately and identified Crittenton by name, even spelling his last name, citing recognition from his NBA career. On August 26, 2011, a murder warrant was issued by Atlanta PD based on witness identification and evidence linking the SUV to Crittenton. On August 29, 2011, he was arrested by FBI at John Wayne Airport in California while boarding a flight. He claimed he was returning to surrender and was extradited to Atlanta before being released on $230,000 bond. On April 2, 2013, Crittenton was indicted on 12 counts along with his cousin Douglas Gamble, including murder, felony murder, attempted murder, aggravated assault, firearm possession during felony, false statements, and gang activity for both August shootings. On April 29, 2015, Crittenton pleaded guilty to voluntary manslaughter and aggravated assault, with murder and attempted murder charges being dropped as part of the plea deal. He received a 23-year prison sentence, while his cousin Douglas Gamble pleaded guilty to aggravated assault and received 3 years in prison and 17 years probation. Crittenton's fall was shocking, but it wasn't the first time a player's personal life boiled over into lethal violence. Decades earlier, Bob Royer's jealousy led to an even more chilling ending. Bob Royer. After retiring from basketball in 1950, Royer transitioned into civilian life, working as a real estate salesman and investment counselor based in Lafayette, Indiana, and Chicago. He was married to Gloria Royer, and the couple had 3 sons and 1 daughter, appearing by all outward appearances to be living a typical American family life in the post-war era. But beneath the surface of this seemingly normal life was a man struggling with jealousy, obsession, and an inability to handle romantic rejection that would ultimately lead to deadly violence. On May 29, 1973, Royer, then 45 years old, entered the offices of Cosden Oil Company in Calumet City, Illinois, where he confronted and shot 32-year-old receptionist Elizabeth Condi Darling twice, resulting in her death. This wasn't a random act of violence, a robbery gone wrong, or a spur-of-the-moment crime of passion. Darling, a divorcee, had been involved in an extramarital affair with Royer, and the incident reportedly stemmed from a dispute related to jealousy. Royer had expressed his desire to leave his wife and marry Darling, but she refused his proposal, leading him to threaten her prior to the shooting. The timeline of events that followed the murder is particularly chilling and demonstrates the premeditated nature of Royer's actions. Contemporary newspaper reports from the Times, Hammond, Munster, Indiana, on May 30th and May 31st, 1973, covered the murder and the subsequent manhunt for Royer after he fled the scene. Following the murder, Royer drove back to his home in Lafayette, Indiana, where he presumably spent his final hours contemplating the magnitude of what he had done. On May 30th, 1973, just one day after murdering Elizabeth Darling, Royer committed suicide by shooting himself in the abdomen with a shotgun. A suicide note found on him read, "To whom it may concern, someone will understand," a cryptic message that provided no real explanation or closure for the families devastated by his actions. Royer's story was one of calculated obsession, but Jason Williams's tragedy stemmed from reckless showboating with a firearm and a desperate cover-up afterward. Jason Williams and members of his charity basketball team had just returned from a Harlem Globetrotters game in Bethlehem, Pennsylvania, and Christophe had been hired to transport the group back to Williams' estate. After arriving at the mansion around 2:30 a.m., a group of about a dozen people, including Williams' friends and teammates, gathered for what was supposed to be an innocent tour of the impressive home. During this tour, in Williams' bedroom, he retrieved a Browning 12-gauge shotgun from a gun cabinet known for his extensive gun collection and began showing off his firearms in what he would later claim was just harmless entertainment. What happened next demonstrates the deadly consequences of treating firearms like props in some kind of twisted performance art. According to trial testimony from witnesses who were present that night, Williams had been joking around, pointing the shotgun at his dog before turning it toward Christophe and saying something like, "Get that out of here," or mocking him in a fake accent, treating the deadly weapon as if it were a toy or stage prop. The gun fired during this reckless handling, and Christophe collapsed immediately, dying almost instantly from the close-range shotgun wound to the chest. Immediately after the shooting, Williams attempted to stage the scene as a suicide, wiping his fingerprints from the shotgun, placing it in Christophe's hand, and positioning Christophe's finger on the trigger in an elaborate cover-up attempt. A 911 call from one of the witnesses claimed Christophe had grabbed the gun and shot himself, aligning with this fabricated narrative that Williams orchestrated. Williams also pressured the witnesses, many of whom were friends or acquaintances who looked up to him, to lie to authorities and stick to the suicide story. Williams reportedly told the terrified witnesses, "We can't have this will ruin me," and instructed them not to mention his involvement, prioritizing his own reputation and career over justice for the man he had just killed. Some witnesses initially corroborated the suicide claim, but later recanted, admitting to the cover-up under oath when the weight of perjury charges and their own consciences became too much to bear. Williams' brother also tried to dispose of his clothing, which had blood on it, furthering the conspiracy to obstruct justice. His first trial began in January 2004 in Somerville, New Jersey, and in April 2004 he was acquitted of aggravated manslaughter and other serious charges, but convicted on 4 cover-up counts, including evidence tampering and hindering apprehension. On February 23, 2010, he was sentenced to 5 years in prison, with parole eligibility after 18 months. If Williams' recklessness cost a life in seconds, the next person on our list was hell-bent on doing that: Carmelo Anthony.
What's Melo game plan?
Shit.
All wheel the highway. Give him the ball.
Give him the ball.
The incident that would define Anthony's off-court reputation occurred during the summer of 2004 when he appeared in an underground DVD called Stop Snitching, produced by Rodney Skinny Sugar Bethia, a member of Baltimore's Treetop Peru Bloods gang. The video, which threatened violence against police informants, featured Anthony for about 6 minutes in what would become one of the most controversial appearances by an NBA player in underground media. Anthony's background made this controversy particularly explosive and provided context for why his appearance in such a video was so problematic. Born in Brooklyn's Red Hook houses and raised in Baltimore from age 8, Anthony grew up in areas plagued by poverty, drugs, and gang violence during the 1980s and 1990s. Baltimore was particularly notorious as a hotspot for gangs like the Bloods, with neighborhoods divided by brutal turf wars and extensive narcotics trafficking operations. Anthony has spoken openly about growing up around the projects and drugs and gangs, crediting basketball and positive mentors for steering him away from deeper involvement in the criminal activities that surrounded him daily. In the Stop Snitching video, Anthony made statements that would be scrutinized and analyzed for years to come by media, law enforcement, and NBA officials. He condemned a local drug dealer, Tyree Blackie Stewart, for cooperating with authorities against a hitman named Solothal Itchy Man Thomas, saying, "Blackie ran our neighborhood. Now he's working with the state and the feds. You can't do that." He turned his back on the hood. Even more troubling and potentially criminal, he allegedly threatened to put money on his fucking Stealing Brains, which could be interpreted as offering payment for violence against a police informant. The DVD was part of a broader Stop Snitching campaign in Baltimore, designed to protect gang operations through systematic witness intimidation. This wasn't just street politics or neighborhood pride, it was a calculated, organized effort to undermine law enforcement investigations by threatening anyone who might cooperate with police. Anthony's participation, even if he claimed it was innocent or unintentional, gave significant credibility and star power to a movement that was actively working to obstruct justice and protect criminal enterprises. Anthony's defense was that he was simply visiting friends in Baltimore during the off-season and was completely unaware that a DVD was being made. He claimed he was just visiting friends in Baltimore during the off-season and unaware a DVD was being made, despite the clearly threatening content of the video and his apparent endorsement of violence against police informants. No charges were filed against Anthony for witness tampering or related crimes, suggesting that prosecutors either couldn't prove criminal intent or decided not to pursue the case for other reasons. Anthony's misstep was in words and associations. Stephen Jackson's, on the other hand, involved pulling the trigger in the middle of an escalating fight outside a strip club. Stephen Jackson.
I actually shot a gun at somebody while I was in the NBA. I actually been in a fight in the stands and got suspended and lost $3 million. I didn't just show it. I actually shot it.
Stephen Jackson was already walking on extremely thin ice when this incident occurred. The 28-year-old guard forward was still on probation following his role in the infamous 2004 Malice at the Palace brawl, where Pacers players and Detroit Pistons fans engaged in one of the most violent and shocking incidents in NBA history. He had pleaded no contest to misdemeanor assault and battery charges in September 2005, resulting in a year's probation, community service, and a 30-game NBA suspension. But on this particular night in Indianapolis, Jackson made a decision that would prove just as damaging as anything that happened in Auburn Hills. The incident began inside Club Rio, a strip club near the Indianapolis Motor Speedway, a venue that occasionally hosted professional athletes but wasn't known for significant trouble. Jackson wasn't alone. He was accompanied by teammates Jamal Tinsley, Marquis Daniels, and a friend named Jimmy Snap Hunter. According to police reports, the trouble started with an argument inside the club involving the Pacers players and a group of local patrons. The specifics of what triggered the initial confrontation paint a picture of wounded pride and territorial disputes. The dispute may have stemmed from interactions with dancers, with one patron, described as a small black male with a handicapped short arm, later identified as Quentin Fingers Wilford, reportedly causing tension by yelling about being a pimp and claiming the Pacers players lacked money. The insult to their wealth and status clearly struck a nerve with the professional athletes. Recognizing that the situation inside the club was rapidly escalating beyond their control, the players made what seemed like the smart, mature decision. They left the club to avoid further conflict. The patrons followed them into the parking lot, where the verbal altercation quickly turned physical. In the parking lot, Jackson was suddenly punched in the mouth and then deliberately struck by a car driven by Dion Wilford, Quentin Wilford's cousin. But Stephen Jackson wasn't going down without a fight, and his response would escalate the situation to an entirely different level of danger and violence. Armed with a legal concealed carry permit, Jackson drew his 9mm pistol and fired 5 shots into the air. He later claimed he fired in self-defense, stating that he was trying to break up the fight and protect himself and his teammates from what he perceived as a genuine life-threatening situation. Police confirmed that no one was hit by the gunfire, and security footage showed Jackson being struck by the car, though it didn't capture the shooting itself. Blaylock's choices were a slow-motion disaster, years of DUIs and ignored medical warnings that finally ended in a fatal crash. Zach Randolph, better known as Zebo, built a long NBA career, but his early years with the Portland Trail Blazers, 2001-2007, were clouded by off-court controversies and rumored ties to gang-affiliated circles. At the center of it all was his entourage, the so-called Hoop family, a group of friends and associates whose run-ins with law enforcement drew heavy scrutiny. One of the most notable incidents occurred in 2003 when police stopped a car registered to Randolph. Inside, officers discovered nearly 90 grams of marijuana packaged for resale and ammunition, hidden in secret compartments. Though Randolph was not present and never charged, the connection deepened concerns about his ties to gang-related trafficking. Law enforcement in Portland also investigated Hoop family members for violent crimes, including a bouncer's murder outside a nightclub. While Randolph was not directly implicated, his ongoing financial and personal support of these individuals suggested to police that he was enabling criminal behavior. Portland Mercury. Things escalated further when an alleged drug dealer claimed he was assaulted by Randolph's Randolph's associates during a dispute at Randolph's West Lynn, Oregon mansion. Police raided the property and, according to reports, found firearms. Randolph was discovered in bed during the raid and later admitted there were weapons under the bed. Despite the spectacle, prosecutors did not pursue charges. Deadspin. The imagery surrounding Randolph also raised eyebrows. In an MTV feature on his home, a Free Larry Hoover poster, referring to the imprisoned leader of the Chicago Gangster Disciples, was displayed prominently. Though not proof of membership, the symbolism added fuel to the narrative of gang affiliation. Randolph also had his own legal troubles, including a 2003 DUI arrest in Portland after police suspected marijuana use in his car. While no official charges ever confirmed Randolph as a gang member, his long string of associations, entourage problems, and symbolism kept the label alive. NBA insiders even noted that a Memphis executive once expressed concern about potential gang-related distractions when Randolph and Tony Allen joined the team. While Randolph's issues were tied to his entourage, Tony Allen faced the spotlight more directly. In 2005, he was questioned in connection to a Chicago nightclub shooting that left one person dead, though he was ultimately cleared and went on to become a defensive anchor for the Celtics and Grizzlies. Tony Allen, the gritty two-way defender known as the Grindfather, emerged from Chicago and became a staple of the NBA's grit and grind era with the Memphis Grizzlies. But in the summer of 2005, while still with the Boston Celtics, he found himself embroiled in a violent nightclub incident. One of the most consequential moments came when Allen was questioned by Chicago police after a shooting at the White Palace Grill, a confrontation that left one man shot and injured. Authorities stressed that Allen was not a suspect, though they did want to interview him in connection to the incident. Shortly after, surveillance footage showed Allen throwing a punch at a Chicago man amid the altercation. A police spokesman confirmed that the video captured Allen physically striking someone, though he wasn't charged in the shooting itself. Subsequently, Allen pleaded not guilty to 3 counts of aggravated battery, charges stemming from the same event. Importantly, he was exonerated in court and found not guilty in April 2007, clearing him of formal legal culpability. Though witnesses reportedly tied gang presence to the altercation, no evidence or charges ever established gang affiliation or intent for Allen. Ultimately, his not guilty verdict and subsequent clean legal record allowed him to refocus entirely on his basketball career. After the incident, Allen relocated his career to Memphis, where he became a cornerstone of their identity, bringing relentless defense, leadership, and a community-focused persona. He earned 6 all-defensive team selections and helped define an era of team-first, defense-first basketball that endeared him to fans and teammates alike. That brings us to the end of this video. For more interesting videos like this, click on the cards on your screen.